Hello and welcome once again to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania podcast. Papua New Guinea is actually Australia's closest neighbour, at least in terms of distance. Yet it would be fair to say that it is often far from the minds of most Australians. The scant bits of news we get from PNG are invariably quite negative, and apart from tales of the Kokoda Trail, PNG is barely mentioned in our school curriculum or popular culture. And so it may come as a surprise to many in Tasmania that there are around 400 PNG-born residents of Tasmania, making them the largest of all the Pasifika communities living in the state. In this episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Anne, who was born and bred in PNG but now lives in northwest Tasmania. Her father, a native Papua New Guinean, was formerly an Anglican bishop in PNG, while her mother is Australian. Anne came to Australia initially to study at the University of Ballarat, but later relocated to Tasmania's northwest, where her mother had settled after retirement, and she now works at the public library in Devonport. In this episode, we talk about some of the different places where Anne lived growing up and get an insight into Papua New Guinean culture, the importance of family and history, particularly her own family's connection with the events of World War II.
So I was born in Goroka, which is in the Highlands of Papua New Guinea. I lived there until I was about 2. And then my dad enrolled in a theological college, Newton Theological. It was in Auckland. So we moved to Auckland in New Zealand at the end of 1992. We lived there for 3 years. Then we moved back to Papua New Guinea in 1996 to Newton Theological College, which is in an area of Papua New Guinea called the Oro Province. We lived there for 3 years until 1999. Then we moved to Lae, which is the second biggest city in Papua New Guinea. We were there for 4 years. And then at the start of 2002, we moved up to Goroka in the Eastern Highlands province. And we lived there, my parents lived there until 2012, and I lived there until the end of 2007 when I moved to Australia for university. So my dad was a priest in the Anglican Church. He became a bishop in 2001. And basically what the Anglican Church does there is every 3 years they move clergy on to a new area to work. So that's why we move so often.
And in the first place you lived in, was that
Goroka?
Goroka,
yeah.
What kind of place was that, and what are your memories of that?
So my memories of Goroka is just a beautiful, beautiful part of Papua New Guinea. Basically, the town of Goroka is built around the airport because they found the flattest part of the town. They put the airport there and then built this town all around it. Okay. I'm not sure currently what the population is. I think officially it was something around 30,000 when I was there in 2007. But that was just a rough guesstimate because like a lot of places in Papua New Guinea, there are a lot of, what you would call slums. So a very large sort of unofficial, uncounted population as well. Okay. But in the Highlands, lots of beautiful produce. There were coffee plantations all around us. Vanilla plantations were also starting to thrive when I was there. But just a lot of fruit and veggies and produce are grown in the area and then sort of either sold in local markets or flown to other parts of the country to be sold. Okay.
Did people there mostly live from agriculture?
The majority of the population. So really in the towns, only people who sort of had further educations were able to get jobs in the cities. Usually if you hadn't completed high school or got a higher education, you usually worked on your family's land. And
did you go to school in Goroka also?
No, so by the time we were living in Goroka, I was being homeschooled. Because my mum was Australian, they were able to enroll me in, I think it was called Distance Education Centre, Victoria, so just like correspondence. So I was doing that for all of my high school period. When I did go to school there, it was through international schools.
What did you get up to in Goroka when you weren't being homeschooled? I guess?
So my cousins lived right next door to us, well, a street over technically. But yeah, we were just at each other's house constantly. My dad's one of 8, and his third born brother, my uncle McLaren, he lived a street over from us. He was the manager of the lands department in Goroka. So yes, me and my cousins, we all just spent a lot of time just roaming the streets. We also just had a lot of friends in the area. So yes, I wasn't a total homeschool loner freak. I did have friends.
Well, I was also going to say that from what I know about, the little I know about Papua New Guinea and other Pacific islands, the concept, the idea of family is much bigger than what we have here.
Yep. So in my dad's culture, basically his brothers and sisters, their kids are my cousins. Any kids that my cousins have, they're my nephews and nieces. Any children that my nephew and nieces have are my grandchildren. And because I'm from such a big family, I've been a grandmother since I was like 5 years old.
Okay.
So yes, there are people nearly the same age as me going around calling me granny, basically.
Okay. That could be a bit unnerving. And what responsibilities do you have as a granny or as a auntie?
Just, I guess, to be a good example, try and be a good example. I guess if they need a bit of financial assistance, lunch money, that sort of thing, help out. Because my mum's family is white Australian. I always used to get confused when I'd come to Australia and meet up with family in Australia because my mum had me a lot later than her brothers and sisters had kids.
Okay.
So I've got, I think in Australia, would they be second cousins, like your cousin's kids?
Cousins once removed.
Yeah. So I get confused, but yes, they're the same age as me here. So in PNG, I would expect them to call me auntie.
Okay.
But they're like, we're not calling you that. Like, you're not our auntie here. So yeah, I would get very confused when I was little.
So you're quite close to family.
Yes.
Growing up in PNG.
Yes, yeah. And my dad had lots of cousins as well. So I can just remember I always used to hate going shopping with my dad or going out anywhere in town with my dad, wherever we were in PNG, because he would always meet someone he knew. Mm-hmm. And the second person we'd meet would be a family member. So I can always remember just standing outside in the sun while my dad and his cousin or his uncle or whoever reminiscing, and I'd be so bored and be begging, like, can we leave, please? And it would be like, no, talk to your uncle or, talk to your cousins or something like that. We've got something called the One Talk system, and One Talks are like they're family, but they're also, I guess in Australia they'd be considered maybe distant relatives or something. Like there's some connection, but it would take like a detailed discussion to actually tie down. Like it could be, this One Talk is a One Talk because X is married to so-and-so and this is so-and-so's best friend. That's how we're One Talk. So it might not even be a blood relative, but they're related to someone who is considered family, so therefore you are family. In PNG, sometimes the One Talk system can get abused, but you could just have like people show up and be like, hey, One Talk, can I spend the night? Okay. And because of the One Talk system, you're obliged to, welcome them in and they can spend the night. And hospitality is very big in Papua New Guinea, so I guess the One Talk system sort of works into that. So, for example, if I go back to PNG and I need to find somewhere to stay in Port Moresby, I can ask my dad and he'll be like, oh, I think so-and-so has a cousin here. Let me call them and see if they'll be able to pick you up from the airport. Like that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Comes in handy. Definitely, family is, it's such a huge thing in PNG. And I guess knowing who you are in your family and where you stand, because in a lot of times who you are in your family will sort of, I can't think of the right word now, but basically, I don't want to say how people treat you depends on who you are, because that's not exactly what it is. But I guess your social standing in the community. It's sort of really important to know who you are, who your parents are, who your grandparents are, where they come from, where their land is, what they did in the village, like what their social standing was. Because, it'll plays a role in how other people will interact with you because of how their relationships are in relation to with your parents or with your grandparents or with your brothers and sisters even. I think things have definitely changed since. I think that was very important, say, for my dad's generation. I think now, because there's been so much moving from villages into cities, I guess a little bit of that connection has been lost now because, I mean, so for me personally, I haven't been back to my dad's village since I think 2000, not even 2000, since 1998.
Oh, wow.
And I, unfortunately, I don't speak my dad's language. Like, my dad speaks 7 Papua New Guinean languages. Like, there are over 800 languages in the country. So speaking 7 doesn't sound that impressive, but, like, in relation to, like, I guess your average Australian, speaking 7 is pretty impressive. Or, technically 8 because he speaks English as well. But yeah, I don't speak Ewage, which is our traditional language, which is really sad, but basically my dad was too busy to teach me because he was, going to uni and then working when I was little. And then it was really important that I spoke English, basically. So I speak Tok Pisin, which is the other national language in Papua New Guinea, which is basically a mixture of English, traditional PNG languages, and I believe German. Like, it's funny, I think German shows up more, especially like when in the spelling of things. Like, house in Tok Pigeon is house, but it's spelled Haus, which is like the German way of spelling, and like blood is blut, like BLUT. So yeah, the German influence, it still seeps in different ways, but yeah, things like that, like with language, like I really am sad that I don't speak our language, and if there's one thing that I would like to do is learn how to speak Ewage.
My next question was going to be about how, to what extent you still interacted or connected with Papua New Guinean culture. Yeah.
Well, one thing that Facebook is great for is keeping me in touch with all my cousins back there, because they're all over Facebook. So that's really good. I think there are more and more sort of younger Papua New Guineans on Instagram and TikTok, so I follow a lot of their accounts, and that's really good, just seeing how things are back in Papua New Guinea recently with the riots that just happened, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was a lot of that on PNG social media, so I was able to get in touch with family, make sure that they were all okay. I think most of my family weren't in Moresby. They sort of live in other parts of the country. So they weren't as affected. But just because of sort of tensions, a lot of the shops where they were all closed down. So they just had to rely on food that they already had at home and trying to get things from the market to last them until all the main shops opened back up. So like that's one thing social media is good for. Like we can instantly, send a message and be like, is everything okay? What's happening there, and are you guys safe?
How was it then when you actually had to go to school? Like, what kind of school was it?
So for primary school, I was going to an international school. I guess they would be considered private schools, but like that was really good going to international schools. I always say that I went to like the poorer international schools because I think that they were like 2-tiered, because there'd be some that would have nearly 50% of the students there would be from expatriate families, so lots of white kids. Asian kids would be going to there. The ones that I went to were all majority Papua New Guinean kids. Yeah, there was a bit of a hierarchy with the international schools. I think the ones that had more expatriate kids were considered more elite. So I guess I went to like the poorer international schools.
Yeah, I was going to ask whether the kids at the international school were of a similar background to you.
Most like parents who had gone to like Papua New Guineans whose parents had gone to university.
So sort of educated parents.
Yeah, who worked sort of in government or private industry or maybe had their own businesses.
How long did you go to international school for?
From prep to grade 6, yeah. By grade 7, I started to be homeschooled.
Did you enjoy school? Like, how was it?
So I enjoyed the subjects I was really good at. So like English and history and literature excelled, but maths and science not so much. So yeah, I think because I'm quite a social person, so definitely towards the end I was struggling with homeschooling. So I was really happy when I got to come to Australia for uni. Just the idea of being around people with classes was very exciting.
Because I suppose one of the biggest learning things from going to school next to homeschool is just having that social interaction and learning those social skills. Although you probably had them through all your
I was lucky
family.
that way. That there's still lots of social interactions with people. So what we would do is, because my mum worked at a nursing college, which is just basically a uni for nursing students. And she just had a little setup in her office with a desk for me. So even during the day, like her students would be coming past and like saying hi to me and other lecturers. So I still got heaps of social interaction.
And of the different places that you lived at in Papua New Guinea, which one do you have perhaps the strongest sort of best memories of?
Probably Lae and Goroka. Lae just because it was so big. From what I was used to when we lived in Popondetta, that's a really small town.
But it's the second biggest city.
It is the second biggest city in PNG. So it had a huge population. We lived right in the middle of the city. So it was just a much more, I guess, exciting place to live for a kid. Although I do have some memories of, because we lived right in the centre of town, there would be like hold-ups or some sort of fighting would happen, and then the sort of city centre would go into lockdown. And then I remember my dad, we had these big gates outside our place, and he'd be like, we'd lock the gates and we'd all have to just stay inside and wait until, they heard on the radio or something that things had settled down. So that's exciting for a kid.
How did Lae differ from your experience in Goroka?
So Lae, because it was so big and there were so many people, because it was one of the biggest cities, you constantly have people moving in from the villages looking for opportunities, looking for work, and then unfortunately not finding anything. So you've got a massive sort of population living, I guess, what you would call slums. And so there was always sort of I remember we were always told to sort of like be on the lookout for pickpocketers. Like that was always a huge problem. I remember one time, I think I was 10 in Lae, 10 or 11. My mum was coming back to the house. She was just waiting to cross the road. And someone had come up behind and tried to pick her bilum. A bilum is a traditional Papua New Guinean bag, and it sort of has like an open front. And she could feel him reach his hand in to grab her wallet, and so she I don't know what sort of a defensive maneuver you would call it, but she basically trapped his hand in her bilum and started yelling. And my dad and a bunch of my uncles were at our place and they heard her and they ran over, and this guy sees all these men running over and he tries to push my mum aside and start running, but she's got him locked in. They come up, they grab him, and basically because they were like, there's no use calling the police, they're not going to come over this. All my uncles basically sat this guy down and gave him this super stern talking to, you need to turn your life around. You can't be trying to pick people's pocket. Either get a job or you might need to go home to the village if you can't find work here, because this is not how you should be living your life, basically. So I remember I got sent upstairs to the house and I couldn't come down for any of that. They were like, no, go upstairs. Right. We need to talk to this guy.
Yeah, so those problems are sort of dealt with in a more informal way.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, there would be no use calling the police. They wouldn't come. They'll be like, why are you bothering us? They basically not read him the right act, but basically told them, my mum is this is what she does in the community. This is what we do here. Why are you trying to steal money from her? Type of thing.
So it's a bit like an intervention.
Yeah, I think that's what they were trying to do, yeah.
What about in Goroka? What are sort of your fondest memories, I suppose, of living there?
Fondest memories, definitely the food. I miss the food from Goroka so much. So Goroka has this huge fruit and veggie market that's sort of very well known. They also have something called a bilim market, which like the traditional bags that they make in Papua New Guinea. All the bilims are hung along these fences along the street, and you can just walk and browse and buy bilims and other sort of traditional goods there. Goroka it's got like a beautiful climate. I think it's maybe top of like 27, 28. Like if it was really hot, it would get to 30, but it's not super humid like it is in Leh. And yeah, just beautiful weather. It's always super green. Like when it's the rainy season, it does rain a lot. But then when it's the dry season, it never got super hot and humid. Although by the time we had moved up there, they were getting more cases of malaria from mosquitoes. So my mum says that when she moved to Papua New Guinea, she moved there in 1965 to work as a missionary nurse. Right. And she said when she was first there, you would never hear of cases of malaria in the Highlands. Mosquitoes just didn't make it up because it was just too cool for them. But by the time that we moved there in 2002, more and more cases of malaria. Yeah, it was definitely getting warmer. I haven't been back since 2012, so yeah, I'm not sure now what the numbers are like there.
When you were growing up, did you have any, I suppose, ambition or dream or plan about what you were going to do in the future?
Not really. I don't remember. I guess sort of like most kids, it always changed what I wanted to be. I remember for a while, after watching Jurassic Park, like paleontologist was number one on the list, and then I saw Indiana Jones, and then I became archaeologist. So basically, depending on what I had just watched, like I'm sure all of my teenage years, I just wanted to be Beyonce because I'm still obsessed with her. But yeah, I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to do.
And were you always thinking that you would leave Papua New Guinea at some stage?
I think pretty much from when I was little, I think that was always the plan. Like with my parents, a lot of, I guess, expatriates who live in PNG, generally by the time their kids start to get to the age where they need to go to high school, they tend to leave the country and go back to where they're from. My parents didn't want to do that when I became a teenager because my dad had just become a bishop, so it was really important for them to stay and work. But I think for university, that was always the plan for me to come to Australia.
And so tell me about what brought you to Australia. What were the circumstances?
So I finished year 12 and then applied for a bunch of unis here in Australia. I got into the University of Ballarat, which I now believe is called Federation Uni. So yeah, I got into uni in Ballarat and moved there, I think the start of 2008 to go to uni, and I loved it there. I love Ballarat.
Yeah. How much of a adjustment was it for you at the time?
I would say the weather was the biggest adjustment for me. I have never lived anywhere so cold. Yeah, that was definitely the biggest adjustment. I think I owned one jumper, and that's all I had packed when I'd moved there. And then we were told, like, oh, Ballarat's cold, you need to get some more warm clothes. So I think we got some things, but I was still just not prepared. Like I wore thongs.
All right.
I don't think I owned a pair of shoes the whole time I lived in PNG. So I had to buy actual shoes when I moved here to Australia and start wearing socks and learning about layers. I think I got a cold every winter in Ballarat just because of like when you go to uni, all the rooms would be super heated and then you'd step outside and it was like Arctic blasts of wind. So yeah, I was sick a lot just when I first moved there. But yeah, it was great. I met my best friend like the first day of orientation. I stood behind her in a line to get henna done on her hand, and we've been best friends ever since. Still friends with heaps of people there. Yeah, I just absolutely loved going to uni there. I did a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in sociology, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and everyone was just like, just do a Bachelor of Arts, you'll figure it out from there. So I did.
Yep, that's what I did as well. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I loved it. I learned so much.
What do you think was the biggest thing you learned from that experience?
Definitely for me personally, I'd say my biggest takeaway was I did not realize until I had moved out of Papua New Guinea and I started learning more about history, it was the impact of colonization on Papua New Guinea. That was probably the biggest thing that I'd learned, just the impact of colonization worldwide. But I guess growing up in Papua New Guinea, sort of you're just living your regular life. I was a kid. I didn't realize just how much of everyday life there had been impacted by colonization. And just even my parents' life, or I suppose my dad's life, and even my mum, she went over as a missionary nurse for the Anglican Church. Like that's quite colonial. I guess my grandparents' lives, so the village that my grandparents are from, it's called Gona. It's in the Oro province, and that was the village where, when the Japanese invaded mainland PNG, that was where they landed. So I don't even know if I knew that before I'd moved to Australia. Like, I knew that the Japanese were there in the village when I was there, but no one talks about it in the context of, world history type of thing. Because Papua New Guinea, I think by the time World War II came around, Papua New Guinea was a British colony, and then after World War II, it was handed over to Australia.
What do you learn about the country in Papua New Guinea at school there?
I think one of the disadvantages of how I did school, because I didn't study any high school history in PNG, I had switched to an Australian curriculum by then, and it was a Victorian curriculum. I remember learning about Sparta and ancient Rome. I don't remember anything about, even in sort of learning about World War II, I don't remember learning much about Papua New Guinea, just with the Australian curriculum that I did. Which, I'm sure they would have covered the Kokoda Trap, because that's really
quite famous.
Yeah, but I don't remember much more. I don't remember reading anything about where the Japanese landed, because obviously I would have recognised if they had mentioned my village. I will say I do have people here at work come up to me and ask me where I'm from, which it depends on my mood, because I'm I am Australian, so sometimes I just say Bernie, and then when they're like, oh, where are you from really? I'm like, oh, I moved here from Ballarat. But if I'm feeling generous, I will expand and be like, my dad's Papua New Guinean. Yep. And then usually there's some sort of connection, they had an uncle who was there in the war, or, they know people who were there in the 60s and 70s. But, a lot of the times I get heard about them in the news, it's very corrupt, or heard about the riots, or a lot of the time someone will be like, oh yeah, we were there until you got independence, and then things started going downhill, so we left. I'm just like, independence was pretty great, especially if you're Papua New Guinean, but okay.
And that's probably the case for a few people from other places I've talked to, where the only coverage that people in Australia hear is bad news.
Yes, yeah.
That's a nice segue onto another question about just how much people in Australia, in your experience, know about Papua New Guinea, and what are some of the misconceptions?
You speak English really well.
Oh,
That's
really?
Not as much as I used to, but yeah, it used to be common, which is annoying. I'm just it's the most spoken language in the world. Surely it's not that surprising that I can speak it. Every now and again, not so much me. I think maybe because I've got more of an Australian accent, but my dad, and I get really annoyed when he tells me later that he's heard this, but a lot of people, when, because he's a member of Rotary, so they do sort of a lot of things in the community. And he's very chatty, he's a popular guy, he loves having a chat with people. Every now and again, someone will mention cannibalism to him. That's their association with Papua New Guinea. So about headhunters and cannibals. And my dad's just what? Why? I don't know anything about that. So yeah, he gets that more than me. But yeah, I think most people will talk about Kokoda with me, I really want to walk it, or oh, my dad did it, and that sort of thing. I've had people ask me if I've done it, and I'm like, why would I want to do it? No, thank you. But yes, my dad has walked it. He went with I think it was a group of all Papua New Guineans. And it was something, I can't remember exactly what the occasion was, but he walked it. But I think he also feels a personal connection to it because I call them boo-boos, which means grandparents, but I believe technically they would be great uncles. They were, I guess you would say, conscripted by the Australian Army to carry packs, so I guess they'd be considered fuzzy wuzzy angels. I'm not 100% sure. I kind of feel a bit icky describing them as that because, I believe they were told to go and they helped carry packs and injured soldiers there. So I think he definitely felt a personal connection to that, walking the Kokoda track, because of the connection with our village there, being where the Japanese landed on the mainland. All the younger generation who was there, his great uncles and aunties, they had all run and hid in the bush when they landed. And then I'm not exactly sure whether the Australian Army came or whether they had fled inland enough to where they didn't, the Japanese hadn't got there yet. But other younger men, they were all conscripted by the, I believe, Australian Army to go work there on the Kokoda track. This is pretty wild, when you think about it. Just being told you have to help out in this war that you really don't know anything about. So so my grandfather, my Bubu Man and Bubu Mary, they were in another part of the country called Millen Bay, and my grandfather, he got selected to go bury Japanese soldiers. There had been a battle there, and he was selected to go. He was quite young, so they selected him to go and bury bodies there. So,
wow.
Yeah. It's kind of traumatic when you think about it.
Yeah.
So when I graduated, because I have the Bachelor of Arts and no work experience, I couldn't get a job in Ballarat. So I ended up moving here to Tasmania because my mum's younger sister, my Aunt Joan, her and her husband, they'd been living here on the northwest since, I believe they moved here in 1965. So because we had that family connection, my mum, when she retired from teaching up in PNG, she'd moved here to Tassie in 2013. So she'd retired and she was living here, at Sisters Beach. Nice. So this is like the best place to retire to. So because I thought, having no luck here, I might as well go be with mum because I hadn't, lived with my parents since I was a teenager. And I thought it would just be the easiest thing to do and cheapest thing to do. So I moved back home here I moved here to Tassie. And my dad retired and moved here a year later once all his visa stuff had been processed.
Okay.
Yeah, it took a year after we applied for him to come for it to be finalised.
What were your first impressions of Tasmania or this part of Tasmania?
So I'd been coming here since I was a kid. Every 3 years, we'd come to Tassie on holiday to Australia to catch up with family. So I had super fond memories of Tasmania. I think I'd come here in 1999, 2014, and then again in 2017 when I moved over to Ballarat, and during uni breaks, I would come over here as well. So I love the beach. I would spend a lot of time, because I love movies, I'd always there was this video shop in Somerset, and every holiday we were here, I would go there, max out my uncle's card, borrowing movies, and then go back to their place and watch them. Because in PNG, we didn't have any cinemas, and we didn't have to buy a proper DVD was very expensive. We have the pirated versions of CDs called VCDs that we would buy, but they were split onto 2 discs. And in the start, you'd see shadows of people sitting down at the cinema, so they were really dodgy. So when I came to Australia, I was like, this is my opportunity to watch real movies. So yeah, very fond memories of doing that and going to the library and borrowing stuff out at the library, because once again, there weren't any. I don't remember if Lay had a public library. Goroka did, but it was very, very small. So yeah, it was really hard to get my hands on any books. So when I would come here, I'd try to borrow out as many as I could to read. So yeah, which probably led to like my lifelong love of books, and now I work at the library. I decided maybe I needed to go back to uni. So I also started volunteering at my church. They had a children's program called Mainly Music, which was basically like 45 minutes of just standing in front of toddlers, singing, dancing.
Okay.
So I was doing that, and then I went back to uni to do my Masters of Information Studies with Charles Sturt University. And it was all online. So I was doing that, and I was also volunteering with City Mission in Burnie and then in Wynyard. Just did a lot of volunteer work while I was at uni. But basically, I finished up doing my Masters in 2020, and sort of like in between, I got a couple of extra gigs on a TV commercial and on the TV show Rosehaven. So yeah, I just sort of did like volunteer and odd jobs until I finished doing my Masters, and then I started applying for library jobs. But COVID basically had hit by the time, I think, what was that, March 2020?
Yeah, March 2020.
And then all the jobs just disappeared. I just basically was like, I don't know whether to wait this out or apply for admin jobs, just something in between. So yeah, it became a waiting game. I think Burnie Library, I think that had sort of like a volunteer open day sort of thing that I must have gone to, because in 2020 I got a call asking if I was still interested in volunteering. I said yes. So I think in May or June 2020 I started volunteering at the Burnie Library, and then I think it was maybe 3 months after that, in August, they asked me if I wanted to start doing some relief there. And then I did, and I also did some relief at Helier College in Burnie. And then, I basically just started regularly getting relief work at the Burnie Library. And then in April 2021, I got a contract at the Devonport Library. And I've been working here at the Devonport Library ever since.
And what's your role here? Like, what are your main tasks?
I'm a library services officer here at the Devonport Library full time. So, basically, I'm serving clients up the front, checking out books, borrowing books. We do lots of digital help. So because we share a building here in Devonport with Service TAS, and the council get a lot of people coming in needing help with things like, say, working for vulnerable people application. So lots of digital help, filling out forms with clients. We also help with family history inquiries, as well as running programs like school holiday programs, and just regularly doing things to promote literacy. We have a 2610 program which assists adult literacy, so that's something the library works really hard to promote. And we always have lots of things going on at the library all the time. It's not just people wanting to borrow and check out books. We offer lots of different services.
What would you say is the thing that you have enjoyed most about this work?
Oh, I love everything about the library. I love being here. It's always such a joy to come to work every day. I have great colleagues too, so that always makes it even more fun to come to work. But I love it when, someone comes up to the front and it's like, oh, I love this book, or I love this movie. Do you have anything else, by this author, or what else would you recommend? As soon as someone asks me what would I recommend, I'm in the zone. I love recommending books and movies, music to people. So that's probably my favorite thing, when I get to just have a chat with the client and find out what they like, and see if there's anything that maybe I could, introduce them to. But also doing kids' holiday programs, it's always fun.
And in terms of coming to northwest Tasmania to settle in, what would you say were some of the more challenging things that you had to adjust to?
I think definitely coming from Ballarat and Victoria in general, just a lot more multicultural, and just sort of a lot more things are open. It's just, I mean, that could be anywhere in Australia when you move to somewhere rural, just sort of the difference, that difference. I definitely found I thought it was a little bit harder to make friends than I thought it would be. I'm not sure if it's just a Tasmanian thing, but because so many people here grow up knowing each other and, their parents know each other, they already have this like inbuilt family friend situation happening. They're not necessarily looking to expand their social group. But I think I definitely found my people. Like that wasn't, but that was definitely something I thought when I noticed when I first moved here, especially sort of because I moved here when I was like 23, I believe. So other 23-year-olds were like, no, we're fine. We don't need new friends.
There is something to that for sure.
Yeah.
But how did you find your people?
And I was actually talking with someone the other day, like we can't exactly remember how we clicked. Like we remember when we met, but there's this moment, I think, like when you meet someone and you just click personality-wise, and we can't exactly remember when. But yeah, I think it was a mixture through volunteering mainly. I met a lot of people through volunteering, a couple of people through the call centre. There's like one friend that I'm still, like we go see a movie every time there's something out in the cinema, like we go see it together. So yeah, it was just, I guess, organic, just putting myself out there, like when there was like a social situation and I was like, oh, maybe we could, maybe there's potential to be friends here. I'll just, see if they want to hang out. And, just, I guess, organically sort of building those connections. But definitely, I think working at the library, I'm around other people who sort of like the same things that I like. Like, we all like books. So, that's a good common ground. So, I know some people like to keep work and their personal life very separate, but I found a lot of people who like the same things as I do at work.